We'll be starting up here in a couple of minutes for those who are logging in. Here they come.
Nice. Icy out that way, David, or
What?
icy roads, sidewalks, icy out that way? Or...
Yeah, they're icy. Sidewalks are icy. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Give folks 30 seconds to sort of finish logging in. Okay. Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here with the Corner Local Roads program. We're your New York State LTAP Center, and one of our foundational webinars. Today, we're going to be talking about essentially safety, worker safety, getting everybody home every single day, as you see on the screen. Our instructor today is Phil Spezio. He's the Washington County Senior Safety Officer, and he's also the Association President for Empire State Safety. Before he gets started, there are a couple of housekeeping details. First off, you want to go ahead and open up your pods, your chat pod, your Q&A pod. The chat pod is where we might send you a note if we have a note to send to you. But more importantly, the Q&A, that's where you can put in your questions, and we'll try to get those answered during the course of the time we're together this hour. May ask you to raise your hands now and then, just to fill out the question. You can raise your hand, we can see that. And of course, we'll go from there. We have some polls to figure who's in the room. So let's start with some polls. So our first poll is, who do you work for? Town, county, city or village, state or federal, tribal, private, weekend? Get a sense of who's on here. So we have a mixture of town, county, city, and village, and some state. That's good. Nice blend. One private. Nobody working for the weekend, Phil. So
that's nice. Okay.
it's early in the week. They're good. Okay.
The weekend's just another day at work, I think.
Well, it can be. That's
sometimes.
Always good. But okay, let's go to poll number 2. How long have you been with your current position? Less than a month, less than a year, 1 to 2, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, or 11 to 20? And then, of course, there's the 20 plus years. We actually have quite a few of those. So one of the things we always try to do with these foundational webinars is that everybody walk home with at least one thing they can use. So make sure you try to pick something up you can use and implement when you get out there, and we'll share those results with everybody. And what is your job? Are you an administrator, a highway superintendent, an engineer, field crew, board member, none of the above? Let's get a sense of who's there. Oh, we have a board member. That's good.
Good.
Engineers, highway superintendents and DPW commissioners, and some administrative folks. Okay, and a field crew. Okay. Okay, so there's your people in the crowd there for you, Phil.
Right,
and
thanks,
again, I'm
David.
going to let Phil go. I'm going to go dark, and Jody and Amanda are in the back as well. And if anybody has any questions, again, put them in your Q&A pod. Have fun, Phil.
All right, super, will do. Thanks, David. Good morning, everybody. Phil Spezio here, as David mentioned, working in safety and health now, private sector for 15 plus years, and now in the public sector for 17 plus years. So I've been doing environmental health and safety for quite some time, private sector and then public sector, and also do a bit of consulting on my own from different times. So anyway, let's jump into this. It's Public Works Team Safety this year for the winter Zoom training. So let's get this started. So talk a little bit about efficiency, right? We're all trying to become more efficient. We're doing more with less people, typically, just about every department and each organizations that we're working with. So it's becoming more and more important to be sure that we're doing it as safely as we can. So we have as many people helping with that. So lots of times I break things down, I throw out a topic, and then I say, all right, what are the 3 main points within this topic that can kind of build on that sort of thing? So when you look at efficiency, it's got to be a blend of safety, quality, and productivity, right? So there's those three things make up that three-legged stool. If you don't have safety, we're going to have issues. Certainly, if you don't produce a product or provide a service that isn't what the customer is expecting, we're going to have issues. And then obviously we got to be productive, right? We got to make tomorrow better than today in some way to be productive. So that really equals the blend of those three tell us how efficient we're going to be. So breaking it down into parts again, we break down each one of those topics, and safety is really a blend again of three different things. What are we going to do? What are the hazards associated with what we're going to do? And then how are we going to control those hazards, right? Our whole entire safety program is based on this. What are we going to do? What are those hazards, right? What are those risks? And then what are the control measures? What are we going to do to get the risk down to a level which matches the reward of doing it, right? We can't take out risk. We've talked about that before. There's risk in everything we do. There's risk in getting out of bed in the morning. Hopefully most days, the reward's worth the risk of getting out of bed. Breaking down quality, it's similar to the ISO, or it is the ISO process. If anybody's familiar with that, it's say what you're going to do what you say, and document what you did, right? Those three things from a quality standpoint, or from, even to a certain degree, safety standpoint. Lots of times your quality program, you can replace safety into the quality section, and then you have it. So the safety and quality line up closely most of the time. The third level of that efficiency, safety, quality, and now productivity, breaking productivity down a little bit. And this is something I started a little bit last year, building on, and it seems to make sense. And when I'm talking about this with different groups, it fits pretty well, whether I'm doing training for some volunteer works like fire departments or work stuff or home stuff. It really breaks down to these three things. When you want to be productive, it's what's the system that you're going to use or follow? Is your people trained to follow that system? And then does your culture allow you to do what it is you're saying you're doing in the training on instructing and following those systems, right? So is any of us doing less with more people these days? Just curious out there, if you want to throw a quick answer in the chat. But is anybody doing less with more people?
So I have few options. We have more work and less people. We have the appropriate amount of work to people ratio. We have less work and too many people.
I love
I'm going to click that one.
I love the third one.
Looks like the majority is we have more work and less people.
Yeah, and that's the common theme, right? So that's where we're gonna kind of go into why it is that we think we need to take a look at systems and training, and then is the culture really allowing us? So if we develop a system per se, and then we train people that follow that system, are we truly doing it? Or is our culturing allowing us, you know what, Phil's done that. He can do it whatever way he wants. He doesn't need to follow the system, right? And I think some people can relate to that. You develop a system, you train people to do the system, and then our culture in different spots allows it to be okay for other people not to necessarily follow it. And that's when things fall down, and that's when things aren't worth the paper that they're written on, right? And that's a difficulty with the whole paper side of things. If we write something down, then we've agreed to it and we should follow that. All right, let's jump into something a little bit more interesting here. So if you've tuned out a little bit, tune back in, because if you looked at the previous slide, and we looked at productivity, which is important, right? We're all trying to be as productive as we can. We're all in a hurry. We have too much to do, too little resources to accomplishment, and we're always in a hurry for some reason, right? So productivity is systems, training, and culture. Now, when you look at grassroots safety per se, right? Interesting enough, it's the same thing. So it's the same thing as being productive, and it really works. What's the system? Are we training people to follow the system? And is our culture allowing us? Is it conducive for us to do what we say we're going to do through the systems and through the training? What do you think? So I'm interested with the group that we have here today is what do you think the foundation of a grassroots safety program is? Right at the bare bones, the foundation of safety, if you had one or two words to say what really is the foundation of safety, what do you think it is? We got an open-ended question for that for an answer, right, Amanda? It looks like it, yeah. Good.
I'm trying to figure out how I can see the answer now.
Oh, okay. And it's more to, have the audience, Amanda, think, a little bit about it. But I'm always interested in when I ask different groups this, what do they think the one thing safety is? And we get a lot of different answers.
So I have a safety culture in the workplace,
Yeah.
training, leading by example,
Mm-hmm.
preventative actions, awareness, common sense, and then in all caps, leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that trust, leadership, and communication, right? Mixed in with a little bit of common sense makes, yeah. I'd have to really take a look at that from a foundation standpoint and say, okay, what do we have for trust? What do we have in means of leadership? And how's our communication? And so often when we have an incident, we start digging down and trying to find out, okay, this is a direct cause, this is an indirect cause, oh, another indirect cause. But when you get to the root cause of what it is, so often it comes back down to either, poor communication, no trust or very little trust in the work environment, and some leadership that we just need to, we need to help support a little bit, because oftentimes people work into leadership roles and they haven't had a lot of experience, and it's tough to transition in from the person doing all the work or doing the work and getting it done to, okay, now we have to, we work on the big thing with leadership is like you're working at things 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year down the road. That's what the leadership is making sure we have the resources available for that project, for that job that's coming up in 3 months, 6 months. It's hopefully not, from a percentage standpoint, very much of putting fires out that day, because that's the difficult and that's the hard thing with leadership is oftentimes you're putting out fires instead of working on something that's 3 months, down the road. All right, so let's break this down a little bit, right? We were talking about systems, we were talking about training, we were talking about culture, and it has a direct effect on both efficiency and on safety, therefore how productive we're going to be. So examples of systems are, okay, if we don't have to do the job, right? Or if we can take the hazard out of the work environment, we can eliminate it, right? We have some sort of chemical and flammability rating is high, meaning the flashpoint temperature is really low. Is there another product we can use because we got to be doing some torch work or something like that? We don't want to have a flammable situation while we're doing welding or torching or other hot work, right? So that's an elimination. Let's get that out of the work environment. Engineering controls separate the hazards, as you can recall, that separates the hazard from us, right? It's a guard on a PTO shaft, right? It's a grid on a box fan. It's something in which even if you wanted to put your finger or hand or some other body part into some sort of machine, there's an engineering control blocking that so that you can't do that. Where we get a little bit weaker on the systems is our programs, policies, procedures, guidelines, things of that nature, hazard assessments, and then what do we do with those hazard assessments, right? And then last, personal protective equipment. So those are the systems that they're talking about, is what do we need for resources and how do we accomplish the job? When you look at training, one of the things here, and someone mentioned training as one of those foundational parts of safety, and it really is, because this day and age, if you're asking somebody to do something, you better be sure that you've trained them, right? You've educated them. They have the knowledge and experience to do what it is you're asking them to do. So the training should be specific to the systems that we developed. It should be effective, it should be efficient, and we should have some way to measure it, right? Go back and say, all right, that system we built and the training we did, go back and see, all right, is it really being followed? Is it work, or did we have a deficiency in it that we didn't see? That sort of thing, right? So along that lines from a training standpoint, and since, someone did say, hey, this is a foundational element, which I agree with from a safety standpoint, what types of trainings do the groups on the call today in the training, what types of training do you do on a regular basis?
This is another short answer one, so I'll give people a few more seconds to
Yep.
type their answers in. You
I
can
think
also,
we're doing pretty good on time. I think we'll be done by noon or so. That's okay, right? Just kidding, Amanda.
like, oh man, I didn't budget for that. Talks and department meetings, confined space,
Okay.
work, right to know,
Mhm.
OSHA, workplace violence, toolbox talk, safety
Okay.
tailgate. None, webinar morning briefing.
Okay, the morning briefings are a great tool, right? As a great reminder, like today, right? It's really slippery outside. Untreated surfaces are going to be, pretty treacherous for the most part, things like that. That's great to have that morning briefing. I love the toolbox safety talk type stuff, because this day and age, it's difficult to grab somebody's attention for 2 hours or even an hour or half an hour. Those toolbox talk of 10 or 15 minutes on some sort of regular basis I think is a nice way to certainly review safety tops and things like that. I know some people mentioned confined space and trenching. We'll talk a little bit about those specific topics as we get going. But really think about the toolbox safety talks. There's a lot of resources out there these days through ESSA, is the Empire State Safety Association. Dave gave us a little plug earlier, but we're an association that we just developed just prior to COVID, and we're trying to provide some help and support to specifically public sector people that may not have as many resources available to them. But think about the toolbox talks and resources to get them. We send out a safety pins, that sort of thing from the county standpoint, the briefs from ESSA. But there's a lot out there. I know on the Cornell webpage, we have a lot of safety toolbox talks that you can utilize. And, it's not just the toolbox talk and that topic. It gives you an opportunity to start with all right, hey, let's review confined space today. And while we're doing that, we can say, hey, what happened last week? Do we have any near misses or close calls, right? What do we got? We got a project coming up in a couple of weeks. We haven't done it in a while. Hey, these are some things we learned last time. Let's be careful. So it's a good communication tool, not only for the topic that day, but also, what happened last week and what might be coming up next week or next month, that sort of thing. In addition to that, obviously, we have some of the other trainings like, on an annual basis, you're looking at right to know, HAZCOM, you're looking at harassment prevention type stuff, right? You're looking at, workplace violence, you're looking at some topics that you need to do on an annual basis as well. So, but the main thing to remember is whatever you're asking your people to do, whatever your people do from an organization standpoint, we have to have a blend of training, knowledge, and experience to allow everybody the opportunity to go home whole every day. That's the key point here. It's much less about compliance and much more about having people have the opportunity to come home whole every day. The third part of this, and I'll just refresh real quick. We had systems, we had training, and now that third component, whether we're talking about productivity and efficiency or we're talking about safety, is the culture. I think this probably has the most impact of anything, because lots of times when we're doing training and things, it's more refresher. We're not giving a lot of people a lot of new information that's been in the workforce for a while. What we're trying to do is build a culture that allows people, gives as many people in the organization, in the team, the opportunity to go home whole every day. And this makes a lot of sense to me. This is a picture of my hard helmet years and years and years ago. I don't even want to tell you how long ago it was. But it was a very, very long time ago. So, but attitude, right? It's the collective of all the team members. So if you have one or two people on the team, even though you have 7 or 8 that have a positive attitude and come in and say, hey, how can I help today? You have 1 or 2 people that come in and, just have a poor attitude, overall poor attitude, and they have reasons for it, right? There's a lot of stuff going on these days, and from, many different avenues. But that negative attitude brought to the team, if what happens when you add a negative number to a positive number, the number that you end up with, the overall number, is going to be reduced. And so my point is try to keep it so that those people that might have a negative attitude, try to bring them up to the 0 point and not keep them in the negative side some way. Be aware of that for sure. That does have an impact on your overall culture. Built on and influenced by trust, leadership, and communication. We spoke about that very briefly earlier, but I think when you're looking at a foundation, regardless of what you're trying to measure in the work environment, if you have trust, a fundamental thread of trust throughout your organization, if you have some pretty good leadership, and you have some effective means of communication so people feel like they're part of it and they're aware of things, everything else becomes so much easier. If you don't have a fundamental thread of trust, everything becomes so much more difficult. And I think trust, obviously leadership and communication, those are those 3 things that you want to look at. So in your work culture, right, what do you think your work culture is like? And then secondly, is how might you be able to improve your work culture?
Other short answer questions if you guys want to type it in. If you can't access the poll, you can always throw it in the Q&A as well. Answers coming in.
Great, thank you.
All right, let's see. We have friendly and supportive of town priorities. Oh, a
Okay.
lot of backstabbing. Try to be more open.
Yeah, yep.
By example, demoralizing and no idea. Group
Uh,
activities and lunches, and trust in the guys. So a wide
Yeah.
range of
Yep. Okay. Yep. And I kind of expected that. And one of the things, I love about my job is I get to work with a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. It could be working with, corrections and police in the morning, social services midday, DPWs, in the afternoon. So I get to work and learn, something new every day. I work with a wide variety of people, from fire department stuff, from emergency response type stuff to, going out and helping to build a bridge. So I'm able to work with a lot of different people who do a lot of different things. And that's what I love about my job. But one of the things with working with so many people doing so many different things is that you really get a feel for 15, 20, certainly by a half an hour of being involved with a certain work team or work environment. I can get a feel for the level of trust. And all I can really say from an overview standpoint is the work environments that I spend time with that have a fundamental thread of trust, that have some fun, but get some work done and really appreciate people for who they are. They don't have safety problems. They don't have quality problems. They're productive, predominantly more productive than the environments that don't have trust. So I think that's really important. And there's a lot more to that, but spending some time in that area, building trust and, build trust, you do what you say you're going to do, right? And that's so important these days is if you say you're going to do something and do it, and that's a great way to build trust. Reflecting on the hard helmet, asking me to overlook a simple safety violation would be asking me to compromise my entire attitude toward the value of of your life. That's pretty strong, right? When you look at that, I'm willing to tell somebody, hey, put your safety glasses on, right? You might have got away with this before, but maybe today's not the day you're going to get away with it. Or, put away the 5-gallon bucket and Get a stepladder, no matter how many times you got away with it, or the chair, right? Those type of things. And we have to help each other. I'm guilty as that as well, right? But if we help each other, we have more of an opportunity to go home whole every day. All right, and then performance. This is something that's a bit new. I just started taking a look at this concept a little bit and applying it. Mostly in the volunteer side of things, fire, EMS, and other things. But if you take a look at performance, and that's important, right? Because just a few minutes ago, we were talking about we're all doing more with less people. So performance starts to become even a bigger part of what we've done, right? So think a little bit about this concept. Again, I break it down in threes. That's what I do. It seems like, you know, most topics you can really, you really have an opportunity to do that, right? But recruitment and retention, I'll just throw that out, right? Is anyone struggling with recruitment and or retention?
You guys a few more seconds to answer. Looks like the majority of people are struggling with recruitment and retention, or 4 people are not.
4 people are not. Okay, good for them. That's great, because a lot of people are struggling with both, you know, recruiting people and then retaining them after they've joined the workplace. So anyway, so here we go. From the concept standpoint of performance, right? You have to have the time, right? We can't make time. Unfortunately, there's 24 hours a day. There's what, 168 hours or thereabouts in a week, right? That's all we have. We can't make time. And that time, you know, you got 50 hours of sleep, you got 50 hours of work, you're down to 68. You have to have a few hours to eat. If you're doing, you know, hobbies and training for something, right? The hours, it's remarkable, but when you start looking at the number of free hours you have, it's not a lot. So that time is valuable to people. And that's my point, is if you're going to take somebody's time or somebody's going to give you their time, make it worthwhile. Make it as much worthwhile as you possibly can. The interest standpoint, right? You have to have some interest. I struggle, right? I'm going towards the 61-year-old mark. So when I grew up and went to college and things like that, this first time I touched a computer was in college. Never had, you know, phones. We didn't have all this electronic stuff. We didn't have, you know, ask Google the answer type stuff. And it's hard for me to gain that interest in the technology things, but I see where there's a benefit in this. And I struggle with this as I've got to, I understand I've got to have an interest. I've got to have a desire, get into that. And I find once I start to learn it and I have a couple of accomplishments, I begin to become a bit more interested in it. And why I take the time to say that is think about that and how we can apply that to the people in your work environment. How can we create an interest, you know, that's increasing on a day-to-day basis? And then aptitude. So time and interest are two things, right? But the aptitude is really how well, right, you just have a sense for being able to do something, right? Yeah, I have an aptitude to draw. I don't, but that's an example, right? Some people have a certain aptitude, right? They were born with, you know, equipment in their hands and a steering wheel and a joystick, and they can make a machine do all kinds of stuff, right? There's a certain amount of aptitude that people have, right? And utilize that aptitude to put people in a position to be successful. So if you can blend, if you can just think of your organization, your team, right? From, hey, their time is valuable, my time is valuable, let's make that worthwhile. All right, from an interest standpoint, people have different interests. Let's use that interest, right, that people have. Let's use that interest in helping the team, right? And then the aptitude, right? You know, Phil might not be able to operate a piece of equipment because he has no aptitude in it, right? So we understand that. So he's going to need more time in the seat. We've got to generate ways of him becoming interest. And once he becomes a little better at it, that aptitude starts to come a little bit. And I think we have to understand that if we want to continually try to safely do more with less people, like and we want to retain people, and we also want to recruit people. I think we have to think of this concept when we're interviewing people, when we're bringing people on board, and we're doing new employee orientation, and we're doing training and things like that. I think from a performance standpoint, take a look at time, take a look at interest, and take a look at those aptitudes of the people you have. I think it might make a difference from from a standpoint of performing, especially when we're trying to do more with less people. All right, let's jump into a little bit. So that sets the stage a little bit. Let's jump into the why of safety, right? I think when it boils down to it, it's about relationships. I think more and more when I look at whatever I do, it's really about the relationships. It's about those people I get to spend time with while I'm doing something. So it's less about what I'm doing and it's more about the relationships, especially as I get older. It certainly becomes more and more apparent to me. It's about family, right? I want to go home at the end of the day because I want to spend time with my family. I want to spend time with my friends, right? I want to be around for my coworkers, right, with those relationships. I want to, at this point, right? I'm trying to leave the organization better than what it was when I came, right? It's about community, a sense of purpose, right? And it's about you. And I think we forget about those type of things. What's safety all about, right? The two distinct parts. I think I talked about this in a prior training, but it's true. When you boil safety down, it's what's the hazards and what are their hazard controls. And then from that point, it's about the human element, right? A little bit about, I think someone mentioned earlier in one of the answers to the questions, it's a lot about common sense, right? And what our approach is, that sort of thing. So those are, you think about some of the hazards and what you're exposed to in a work environment. What do you think? Do you think others have an impact on your safety?
So overwhelmingly, yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Great. So that's what I was hoping to hear, because we all interact and we all have an impact on others people's safety, and they have an impact on ours. So the house safety, right? How do we encourage a positive safety and health culture, right? Well, safety is more of a value than a priority. I've talked about that in the past. And again, those three things of trust, leadership, and communication. We have to view safety as a value, as a core value, so that if things get busy, if we got to get something done, it's got to happen, right? It's going to happen, but we have to be sure everybody understands it's important to get it done, but to get it done safely. In order to do that, safety has to be an understood value of everybody involved. It can't just be a priority, because our priorities change every day by outside influences. They're easily influenced. Our values, they're not as easily influenced by outside circumstances. It's how we grew up. It's what we're made of, things like that. When we dig into the standards a little bit, these are the main standards that we're looking at from a public works type department. We've got the mine safety, that MSHA is out there, right? Refresher training each year, 8 hours, things of that nature, 24 hours for the initial training for miners. And then all of the requirements are in the 30 CFR, part 46 and part 48 primarily for us. Public works, right? We've got the OSHAs, and they're the 29 CFRs. You got the construction standard, which is 1926. That applies to our job sites or project sites, things like that. And then we've got the general industry, which is the 1910. That's primarily focused on our shops and things like that. They're standards that do cross over, and regulations you have to meet in both applications. We'll talk a little bit about that. But those are the standards. If you're not familiar with them, it wouldn't be a bad idea. You don't have to read the OSHA regs at night before you go to bed like I do, but it's worth taking a look at. To try to make sure you understand it. So with that, how many people are familiar with these type of safety standards?
So our options are very, somewhat, and I should brush up on them. Looks like we have a mix. 3 people are very, 9 people are somewhat, and 7 people say I should brush up on them.
Okay, great. Okay, super. Thank you. From an enforcement standpoint, MSHA enforces our mines, right? If you do have property adjoining the mines that your shop is on, that's part of the MSHA. If your mine is down the road a ways and not adjoining to the property of your shop, then you'd be more, enforced by PESH if it's public sector, and then OSHA if it's private sector. So I think for the most part, everybody has an understanding. PESH enforces in New York State the public sector side, they enforce the OSHA regs. For the most part, they're pretty much the same. Inspection priorities, from a priority standpoint of when PESH and or OSHA decides, hey, we got to go do an inspection of a work environment. The first thing is when something is discovered that's of imminent danger situation. Once they find out about something like that, PESH or OSHA will be there very quickly for that. That's priority inspection number one. Secondly is, severe injuries and illnesses and the report of that. And just real general, there's a lot more to it than this, but I thought I'd throw out as a reminder, we have to report fatalities within 8 hours. Hopefully you never have to do that. Inpatient hospitalization, amputations, or losses of an eye within 24 hours. And there's a whole bunch more requirements, and that's under the 1904. That's the CFR 1904 section. Workers' complaints are the next priority number 3. Referrals, like from another organization that might be out there, like, NCON, DEC, some other, agency that was out there and noticed something, drove by a, maybe a trench job or something like that and said, oh, that doesn't look right. Let me give the folks from PESH a call, see if they can take a look at that. Targeted inspections are another one, such as like an industry, like a few years ago, they were targeting silica, right? And then confined space and then maybe trenching. So those inspections occur typically from a specific hazard or a specific task, and then follow-up inspections after that to be sure that if there was any issues that needed to be abated, that they've been abated. Talking about injury and illness logs, everybody should have this posted now. And it should be the 900.1 for public sector. And if we have any private sector people on, I think maybe at least one, that would be your 300A. The 900 should be kept in a log, as well as your 300s for the private sector. That's where the people that were injured, how many days away they were, what body type was injured, things like that. That's the log. But the 900.1 and the 300A should be posted now. They're posted from February 1st to April 30th. There's also the electronic record keeping that people have been talking about lately. If someone does have questions or are struggling with electronic record keeping, by all means reach out. But there is a little electronic form that you can fill out on the OSHA webpage. That'll take you through whether you need to do electronic reporting for your particular establishment or whether you don't. In the questionnaire, and you'll see it right on the OSHA webpage, is they'll ask you some questions, and one of those questions is, are you private or public? And what you want to answer so that you can use the form to come up with whether you need to electronically report them or not. There's databases, but they get to be a bit complicated. You can put in there, but just answer no, that you're not a federal or a state or local government. Answer that question no, fill out everything else, and then it'll tell you whether you need to report electronically. But we don't have a whole lot of time to go into that today. But like I said, if you have any questions about it, if people don't know whether they need to do electronic record keeping or not, just reach out and we'd be glad to help you with that. So that's a little bit about the injuries and illnesses. Hopefully everybody's got a good way of recording that stuff. So let's talk a little bit about HAZCOM right to know. Everybody should be pretty familiar about this, right? An inventory of all chemicals. There should be an SDS at this point for each chemical. So that used to be MSDSs, right now they're SDSs, safety data sheets. Some pictograms for the labeling. If you're putting something in a secondary container, be sure it's labeled and be sure that container is suitable. Right. And then we have adequate training so people can work with these chemicals safely. Right. This is 1910.1200 in the regulations. And it goes across both 1926, which is our construction side, and 1910, which is our shop side. 1926, I think it's 59. 1926-59 is the reference point on what brings you back into construction standards, brings you back to the general industry to follow the HAZCOM right to know regulations. That is still that's the first standard that OSHA ever made and adopted, that sort of thing. But it's also still the most cited standard. When we get down to hazards and hazard assessments, it's what do we do, right? What are the tasks? what are the hazards associated with those tasks, and then what do we do from a control measure standpoint. We talked about this, and this is really your entire program, and this is in subpart I, appendix B of the OSHA regs. And you'll find it in subpart E for the construction standard. So it's important to take a look at that, and again, be aware. You don't have to study the OSHA regulations like I do, but it'd be nice to know. I think it's good to know where they are located. Or again, you know, it certainly would love to help anybody if they have any specific questions. Lockout, tagout, another word, hazardous energy control, right? We're doing that with dump trucks and loaders and backhoes and things like that. Just be sure that you understand all the hazards, right? Not just the electrical, not just the hydraulic, not just the pneumatic or the air, right? There's all kinds of hazards and potential energy sources in the equipment we have. These days, we're starting to see more and more, you know, battery type stuff, right? Electric type vehicles, things of that nature. So be pretty aware. There's a lot more hazards. The electricity is held longer, right? You've got to neutralize, bring that down to the neutral state. So be careful about that. But those are the general steps that you see up on the slide. I won't read them. And then when you put something back in service, it's in the reverse. Be sure that if you're working on a piece of equipment and there's other people around, you let them know about it. So from a standard standpoint, it's 147, 1910, 147 in general industry. And it's 26.417 in our construction standards. Confined space, somebody mentioned this earlier about training and stuff, and this really pops up. There's confined space and permitted confined spaces, right? Some of our sewer districts and things of that nature, or our water departments, things that are working in this sort of thing all the time. Be sure that you're trained, you're up to speed on that, you have a way out, right? The definition of confined space is, you know, limited egress or access, right? And not designed for continuous human occupancy, right? That's the confined space. If it's a permitted confined space, there's another additional hazard. So 1910-146 is our general industry standard, and then 1926.1000 is the construction side of that, if you're looking at it from a standard standpoint. Trenching, we all dig, right? We all dig. The type of the soil is important. Typically, it's no better than, you know, class B soil. Oftentimes it's class C soil, and that generates that, you know, 1.5 feet out to 1 foot down. So our trenches become pretty deep pretty quickly. At 4 feet, you've got to have some sort of safe access and egress every 25 feet. And I even consider dropping that to 3 or 2. You're jumping in a trench and it's, you know, 3 feet deep, or trying to get out of it. You know, it's still a little bit of a task. So think about that. But at 4 feet, you definitely have to provide some sort of safe access. 5 feet trench depth or greater requires some sort of protective system. Lots of times it's sloping in our industry, but sometimes it's shoring or shielding. At 20 feet, so if you're digging down and you're below 20 feet, you've got to have some sort of PE design system. Keep your spoils and equipment at least 2 feet away from the trench, and constantly be inspecting the trench for hazards, especially after weather events and things of that nature. Also traffic, and keeping traffic away from our trenches. I see once in a while I get to a job site and we've got some traffic that's pretty close to those people, you know, in the hole in the trench. They have nowhere to go. So we got to be sure that when we're looking at that we're protecting our people in those trenches in that application. Work zones and flagging, we talked a little bit about that, but a system is very important here. The training to follow that system, but also the communication. The biggest thing is once you figure out your work zone and your flagger system, everybody needs to know that. Touch the system, send somebody through, take pictures, document your work zones, document who's there and who's doing the flagging and who's operating the equipment. It's really important. Remember, we're going signage first, flaggers second, and then finally bringing in equipment, right? And then we do it in reverse order when we take the work zone back down again. It's so important, especially nighttime. Make sure that you're seen, make sure you have a way out, that sort of thing. People are driving, and they're driving with lots of distractions these days. So we can't count on people seeing us. You've got to view those vehicles coming into our work projects as if they want to run us over. That's the only way to properly protect all of us. Work centers and project sites, right? These days, you know, if we're not, you know, this year we've had a fair amount of precipitation and snow and rain, and we've been out on the roads a lot, but think about your work sites, your centers, your project sites, all of those type of things, right? Keep them clean and organized, have some sort of a flow that you've designed from a work material standpoint. Make sure you have room to move, right? Store like stuff with like stuff, things of that nature. Have it some sort of adequate resource and inventory level, things like that, and make sure you always have a clear means of egress out of any situation. So this shows up, this work center and the requirements shows up a lot in the general industry, the 1910 throughout the standard, from in the egress thing and the walking working surfaces, which is relatively new. They've revamped that a little bit. So take a look at the walking working surfaces on the general industry side, and then it's subpart C for the most part in our project site or the construction side of things. Fall protection, right? Fall protection. This is not a great place for fall protection here, right? Can we eliminate the need for climbing, right? We gotta like say a grease fitting of some sort, and it's way up in the air. Can we put an extension on it and be able to grease it from the ground? That's an example of that, right? Do we have to climb, right? Prevention is much better, right, than protection. Correct ladder and ladder usage, right? We don't want to be using a step ladder as an extension ladder. It usually doesn't work out real well for us. Good climbing techniques, proper PPE and things like that nature. Really good thing to make sure, because that's one of our leading causes of injuries is falls. Subpart N of construction, 1026.500, and then 1910.22 for the general industry from a fall protection standpoint. Again, good places to go take a resource. Harassment and violence prevention, it's always been something we've talked about. We do this every year. It's an hour and a half training type thing. It covers everything that we need to cover from a harassment and prevention standpoint for workplace violence prevention, right? Much better for prevention than it is protection. Treat people the way they want to be treated. That's probably the biggest thing that I can talk about, is try to treat people the way they want to be treated, treat people fairly and consistently. And, this is where you go back on the trust in the work environment. If you have a good foundation of trust, you're probably not dealing with this too often. If there's not much trust in the work environment, you're probably having some difficulties with this from time to time. So treat people right. Personal protective equipment, real important, right? From our standpoint, just remember, it's the last measure, right? It's our last control measure is the personal protective equipment side. We're trying to do everything we can to eliminate it, engineer out the hazard, right? Some sort of safe work practice and procedure, training, education, knowledge. And then lastly is that PPE, right? Last measure of defense, but still important, right? So make sure you've done your quality assessments, right? There's an assessment piece that we have to do, and then you should have some sort of a spreadsheet indicating, okay, this task requires this PPE to be worn, right? And then you have a list and check marks and things like that. You'll find the regulations in subpart E of the construction standard, 1926.95. And also it's in the 10.32, 1910.132. From the general industry side, which explains a little bit more about the hazard assessment, the PP hazard assessment. But you should have one of those on file, and it should be updated whenever you add a new job or annually type thing, to make sure that we have the proper PPE, the proper fit, training on use, care, maintenance, any limitations that you might have from that wearing that PPE, things of that nature. So lots of times important. We're separating out respirators as a form of PPE, but separating that out, everybody should be at least doing the Appendix D training, which you'll find in the 1910.134. It's Appendix D training, and everybody should be trained at least to that level, because every once in a while you might be wearing a respirator of sorts, dust mask, like a Moldex N95 or something like that, if you're working in a dusty environment. Remember to engineer out the hazards by using water, like a wet saw or something like that. If you're cutting concrete, try to keep those particles down, or some sort of intake for an exhaust, so that you're capturing the dust before it gets into the breathing zones of the workers, right, of your team players. Required usage. indicates something different. If you're requiring people or your exposure level is over the Pell for a certain chemical, now you're talking about physicals and fit test and training a little bit more extensively. So maybe take a look at your respirator program, see where you're at with that sort of thing. Let's talk about some other things such as guarding, right? Proper guards, right? Proper tools in which you're not being able to use that tool because of the guard, and you're taking the guard off. Really think about that, because the guarding is your way to protect or isolate the hazard from us. So always take a look at the guarding, and if you find tools that there's the guarding has been taken off, see if you can figure out why that might be. Tools and equipment, right? Another thing, right? We have tools and equipment, and they help us do our job much more efficient, oftentimes much more safer. But when we're using tools and equipment, don't forget there are hazards associated with the use of those tools. So be sure that people are trained properly with tools and equipment. Ergonomics, again, I think that's been out there for a while. It picked up a fair amount of traction, but I think it comes into play again a little bit more, because now we're continually doing more with less people. Is be sure we're doing everything that allow our teams to do something in a safe manner, especially those things that you're doing constantly all the time, repetitive type stuff. Because now we, in a place in which we might have had people to share the job, right, and rotate people through, we may not have that luxury as much anymore. So be sure we're doing whatever we can to change the work environment, not the person. Change the work environment, so we're actually taking and fitting the work environment to the person. That's what the ergonomics is all about. So take a look at that from your office setups to how you're doing your work. Can you elevate the work so you're not bending over? Can we do something from a mechanical advantage so we're not lifting something constantly, twisting, turning, things of that nature? Gripping, right? If we're having to grip something for a long time, okay, how do we make it so it's easier on the body? Slip, trips, and falls, always, from our standpoint, the number one reason for injury each year is some sort of slip, trip, and fall. Certainly this weather is difficult, and it's hard to move around, so be conscious of that. But slip, trips, and falls, whatever you can do to keep your floors dry, keep your working surfaces so they're not slippery, really good thing. Make sure you don't have trip hazards, rugs, right? Being able to trip on rugs, or oftentimes you start looking outside and you're looking at your sidewalks, especially like pavers and things like that. Take a look at that and identify those that could cause a trip hazard, and try to get them repaired in a timely manner. The electrical infrastructure, right? I'm seeing lately, I found this a couple areas, is that multi-strip plugged into a multi-strip. That's a real problem, right? Because when you look at it, you've got a multi-strip plugged into another multi-strip, right? So maybe you have 10, 11 outlets that are available through there. It all is going back to one outlet, which is on one circuit. So you can overload those things very quickly. So take a look for those things. It's common that we don't have enough electrical outlets or enough circuits, and we start adding on, but you start putting on, charging stations for lithium batteries and some of the other stuff that we're dealing with, you could start consuming too much power very quickly. And vehicles and machinery, right? Think about, when I think about vehicles and machinery, I think a lot about backing up, right? Backing out of something, backing into something, right? If we're backing a piece of equipment, piece of machinery, if we don't have a guide, get out and look, right? Get out and look, tell people in the area, hey, you're backing up. See if you can get a guide, one guide only. But be very careful with those backing up incidents. I worry about this quite a lot. Especially with people distracted on cell phones, things like that, walking across that threshold of that doorway at the garage, and somebody not seeing them or backing up a loader, right? If you run a loader before, there's lots of blind spots with those pieces of equipment. Don't automatically think the operator in a vehicle can see you, right? Make sure you make eye contact with them before you approach or get into the work area at all. It's very important from the standpoint, right? And it's not only backing up, it's just moving machinery in general. Don't approach somebody in a machine or equipment without making eye contact and getting a head nod or something first. One guide only, and don't remember goal when you get out of the vehicles, right? Check and see, make sure you know where you're backing up. We have a few backing up incidences every year. And if we're using goal or using guides, we can eliminate those type of things from our work environment. Wrapping up here a little bit from a public works, and this is, more the team safety side of things this time, right? If we work on building those systems, right? Those systems in which allow us to do the work, right, that we're asked to do. So build great systems, develop good people. We're developing good people by, taking a look at the time they're willing to give, the interest, the aptitude that they have, and put them in positions to be successful, right? How do we do that? We have a foundation that we're building of, some sound trust, some leadership, right? And some excellent communication. But remember that, we're doing more with less people. It's really, really important to understand and train people to follow our systems, right, that we build, and then to report back, hey, if we did develop some sort of system and we have a deficiency in that, hey, let's talk about that. We can change that. I'd rather change it, get it on paper, do the training, than to just go around it and say, well, that didn't work, so we're just going to do it this way. Document it so that we actually are doing what we say we're going to do. So from a couple of questions here, do you think you could improve any of your safety systems related to the topics we covered today?
So our options are yes, somewhat, and no. And if you guys would like to elaborate, you can throw it in the Q&A. So far, no no's, so that's good.
Okay. Yeah, David put some pressure on me there about having 1 point to come to come away with this morning after the training. It's like, oh.
85% says yes, 15% somewhat.
Yeah, and I wonder with this group, right, and that doesn't surprise me, right? Do you have another one for that training effectiveness, or do we just kind of combine them together?
Yep, I got one.
Yeah, throw that up there real quick, and then while they're answering, I'll just talk through that a little bit. So what do you, when I look at this and say, the systems, when I, and I get it, right? I'm not saying it's easy, but I see the benefit of developing systems, but they're difficult, right? It's difficult, regardless of what department, what do you do? It seems difficult to develop that system, which lots of times is, you do what you can for engineering controls, but it amounts to like a work procedure, a process, a standard operating guideline, something like that, right? A policy or procedure. And it's difficult to get those things accomplished, but when you do, what a great tool it is, because if something does happen, right, some unexpected thing happens and we have an incident, we have an unplanned event that adversely affect work operations. If we have systems in place, we go back and look at the system and say, okay, what happened, right? What happened that allowed this to occur? And it's a really good investigation tool on top of a training tool. So what do we have here? Is your training effective and do people understand? Okay, that's good, right? That's pretty good. So, super. All right. So anyway, let's go to the next one. That's probably enough on that. But build great systems, develop good people, encourage people to think things through. We talk about the dominoes or the Swiss cheese effect. Not often is it one event that calls, something unplanned that adversely affects our work operations occur. Usually it's a number of things, right? If somebody, we played dominoes when we were kids, right? You line up the dominoes. If you do it properly, you hit one and the last one falls. Well, that last one that falls is that event. So one of us has to pull the dominoes out. This gentleman here, I had a conversation with him before I took this picture, and he was on a 5-gallon bucket, upside down bucket. So those of you that know me know that that's a big pet peeve of mine. And I said, hey, really, don't you have something better than the 5-gallon bucket? I came back and, he had his step stool or step, ladder out. So encourage people to think things through, think about the domino effect. If you don't pull the domino out, who will? Right. And, one of the things from doing safety so long is you don't want something to happen after you walk by something. And for whatever reason, you chose not to say something and then something happens, right? It's about going home whole every day. We've talked about that over the years. The why is safety. I have to bring that up. Right. We talked about that earlier with family and relationships and things like that. This is a picture that's very dear to my heart. Still a bit difficult to talk about because 2 of these individuals are no longer with us. Both had succumbed to their battles with a different type of cancer. And they both had a profound effect and continue to have an effect on my life. So regardless, every incident is a number. It's a life, it's a story, and family, friends, and coworkers are affected. So let's work together to try to do whatever we can to prevent these things from happening. I think that's the most important thing, is how do we help each other? The opportunity to go home whole every day. That's our big thing to walk away with, is let's try to help each other so we all have the opportunity to go home whole every day. So with that, I don't know if there's any questions out there now, or we have any time for questions, but what is it? It's 9:59, David.
Anybody have a question? Go ahead and put it into Q&A. You can see I've got my snowman protected there.
Yeah, I saw that earlier. I didn't have a chance to comment because we went live so quickly, but I love it. Does he know how to walk like a penguin or a duck, David?
I think he's just static. He's just standing there. He's the supervisor. He's just watching the work.
That's funny. I love it.
Well, thanks, Phil.
Yeah.
Everybody who joined us, thanks again. Everybody have yourself a safe week. It's a little slippery out there with the ice in places. And with that, we will see y'all next week on our foundational webinars. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Phil.
Yep. Thanks, David.